What happens when one of the most respected and charismatic preachers of our time suddenly opens up about the one thing every leader fears, but few ever talk about? Bishop Noel Jones, a man known for his fire, his intellect, and his larger-than-life presence, recently spoke words that stopped millions in their tracks. It wasn't a sermon filled with shouting or power. It was quiet, honest, almost painful, because for the first time, Bishop Jones pulled back the curtain and spoke openly about aging in ministry, about the weight of legacy, and the moment he realized that even greatness has an expiration date. But here's the part that left everyone speechless. What he said next wasn't just about him. It was about every pastor, every believer, and every person facing the reality of time. When Bishop Noel Jones speaks, people listen. Not just because of his decades of ministry or his powerful way with words, but because he has lived through every high and low that comes with being a spiritual leader in the spotlight. His name carries weight in both the church world and beyond, from the City of Refuge in Los Angeles to countless pulpits across the globe. But this time, the message that captured millions wasn't about prophecy, power, or prosperity. It was about something far deeper. The passage of time, the fragility of the human body, and the unspoken truth that even the strongest voices eventually grow weary. Bishop Noel Jones recently opened up in a way that many didn't expect. He spoke candidly about his health, his age, and the emotional toll of carrying the weight of ministry for more than half a century. It wasn't a message wrapped in energy and celebration. It was reflective, emotional, vulnerable. And for many, it was the first time they saw this iconic pastor not as a public figure, but as a man grappling with what it means to grow older in a role that demands endless strength. The video of that moment went viral almost instantly. People shared it across platforms with captions like, "This broke me," "I wasn't ready for this," and "His honesty is everything we needed." What Bishop Jones revealed struck a nerve with millions who have watched their own pastors, parents, and mentors grow older while still trying to carry the same burdens they did in their youth. But here's what makes this moment even more powerful. This wasn't just another sermon. This was a confession. It was a message that peeled back layers of image and expectation to reveal something raw, something deeply human. For years, Bishop Jones has been celebrated for his intellectual preaching and fiery delivery, yet now people are saying his softest message may be his most powerful one yet. So in this video, we're going to explore what really happened. What exactly did Bishop Noel Jones say that brought people to tears around the world? Why did his words resonate so deeply not only with believers, but with anyone who has ever struggled with aging, purpose, or letting go? And more importantly, what can this teach us about leadership, legacy, and the inevitable transitions we all face? Stay with me, because the deeper you go into this story, the more you'll realize that Bishop Jones wasn't just talking about himself. He was speaking to a generation. Now, let's start with the moment that started it all. The message that had the world saying, "I've never seen Bishop Noel Jones like this before." It started as a typical Sunday morning at the City of Refuge Church in Gardena, California. The atmosphere was charged, the choir was in full voice, and worshipers filled the sanctuary with expectancy. Many had come to hear another electrifying message from Bishop Noel Jones, a man known for his thunderous preaching and razor-sharp insights into the human condition. But that day, the tone was different. Bishop Jones took to the pulpit with a calmness that caught the congregation off guard. There was no fiery opening, no grand crescendo of words. Instead, he stood there, composed, reflective, and almost subdued. You could sense it from the first few sentences. Something was different. He began to speak, not as the powerful orator everyone knew, but as a man looking back over decades of service, asking questions only time could inspire. He said, "There comes a point when you start realizing that your body can't do what it used to do. Your mind wants to go, but your body says, 'Not today.' The congregation fell silent. For a moment, the usual shouts of "Amen" and "Preach, Bishop" faded. People were listening, truly listening. Then he went on, saying something that sent a ripple through the crowd. "I've been preaching this gospel for over 50 years, but there are days when I ask God, what happens when I can't do this anymore?" Those words hit differently. They weren't just about age, they were about identity, about purpose, about what happens when the very thing that has defined your life begins to slip away. For a man like Bishop Noel Jones, who has dedicated nearly every breath to ministry, that question wasn't rhetorical. It was real. The moment was captured on video, and within hours, it began spreading across social media. On TikTok, snippets of his message reached hundreds of thousands of viewers. On YouTube and Facebook, the full sermon was reposted, commented on, and shared by people from every generation. Viewers weren't just watching, they were reflecting on their own lives. Some wrote, "This is what real ministry looks like, honesty," while others said, "I've never seen Bishop Jones so transparent." Even younger audiences, many of whom had only seen him as a larger-than-life figure from the Preachers of L.A. television series, began to comment about how his humility and authenticity made them rethink what true leadership means. But here's where it gets even more powerful. As the clip gained traction, many began connecting Bishop Jones's words to a broader conversation about pastors growing older, about burnout in ministry, and about the silence surrounding the emotional and physical toll of leadership. What started as one man's reflection turned into a global moment of truth. And while fans celebrated his courage to be vulnerable, others began to wonder, was this Bishop Jones's way of preparing the church for something? Was he hinting at stepping away from the pulpit, or was he simply giving the world a glimpse of the reality that even giants get tired? This question set the internet ablaze. Comment sections were filled with concern, speculation, and heartfelt prayers. One viewer wrote, "He's still got fire in him, but I can see the weight on his shoulders." Another said, "If Bishop Jones ever retires, it'll mark the end of an era." But what many missed was that his message wasn't about leaving, it was about legacy, about passing the torch with grace, about reminding everyone that strength isn't just in shouting from a pulpit. Sometimes it's in admitting that you're human. Still, behind the calm voice and measured tone, there was something deeper, something almost prophetic about the way he spoke. It was as if Bishop Jones knew his message wasn't just for his congregation, but for every leader, every believer, and every soul wrestling with time and purpose. But here's where it gets truly interesting. Because just when people thought this was simply a heartfelt reflection, Bishop Jones said something that changed the tone of the entire message and sparked a whole new wave of discussion online. As the sanctuary sat in silence, Bishop Noel Jones began to shift the weight of his message. His voice, though calm, carried the kind of authority that only comes from experience, the kind that commands not just attention, but reflection. You could sense it wasn't just another Sunday sermon. This was something heavier, something deeply personal. The room grew quiet enough to hear a pin drop. He paused for a moment, then leaned slightly forward toward the congregation. "You know," he said, his tone lowering to almost a whisper, "there comes a time when you have to confront the truth that your season is changing. And the hardest part of ministry is knowing when to let go." Gasps filled the room. People looked at each other, uncertain of what he meant. Some thought he was talking about slowing down. Others feared it was a hint at retirement. But for Bishop Jones, it wasn't about quitting. It was about acknowledging something every leader must eventually face: the reality of time. He continued, "I've spent my life preaching about faith, healing, and deliverance. But I've learned something. The same God who gives us the energy to start must also give us the wisdom to know when to rest. And some of us, we don't know how to rest." Those words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Some people began to cry quietly, while others nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. You could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking to every pastor who's been running on empty, every believer who's afraid to stop because they think resting means failure. He went on to describe the physical and emotional exhaustion that comes with years of ministry. You can preach through pain, you can shout through sorrow, you can minister through fatigue, but at some point, your body reminds you that you're still flesh. No matter how anointed you are, no matter how powerful you feel, time humbles us all. Then came the moment that sent chills through the congregation and the millions who later watched online. He said, "I've been asking God lately, what happens when I can't do what I used to do? What happens when the voice that's blessed nations starts to fade? Who do I become when the pulpit no longer needs me?" The camera zoomed in on his face, and you could see the vulnerability in his eyes. This was a man who had preached to thousands, traveled across continents, and influenced generations. Yet in that moment, he was just Noel Jones, a servant of God, standing face to face with his humanity. Social media exploded after this clip surfaced. Viewers said they had to pause the video to gather themselves. One person commented, "I've been in church all my life, and I've never seen a pastor speak with that level of honesty." Another wrote, "This is what real ministry looks like. No performance, just truth." But as emotional as that moment was, there was another layer to it. A spiritual revelation that Bishop Jones was trying to deliver through his vulnerability. He wasn't just reflecting on aging, he was teaching a generation of leaders what it means to prepare for transition with dignity. He was, in essence, showing that legacy isn't built in the noise, it's built in how you handle the quiet. He said, "I'm learning that aging isn't a curse, it's a calling. It's God's way of inviting us into wisdom, because sometimes it takes losing strength to understand what real strength is." Those words became the heart of his message, and the reason it resonated so powerfully. For decades, the church has celebrated youth, energy, and charisma, but few have publicly embraced the process of slowing down, of shifting from leading the crowd to mentoring the next generation. Bishop Jones, in that moment, did just that. And perhaps the most powerful part was his transparency about the fear that comes with that shift. He admitted, "It's hard. It's hard watching your body change. It's hard knowing there are things you used to do that you can't do anymore. But it's also freeing, because when you finally accept that, you stop striving to prove something and start living in peace." The congregation gave a standing ovation, not out of excitement, but out of respect. They weren't cheering for a powerful sermon. They were honoring a man who had just given them permission to be human. That day, Bishop Noel Jones didn't just preach a message. He modeled one. He showed the world that faith isn't just about miracles and mountaintop moments. It's about facing reality with grace and courage. But as that clip spread across platforms, people began asking a new question. Was Bishop Jones simply sharing a heartfelt reflection, or was this his way of preparing for something more permanent, perhaps even stepping down from the pulpit for good? That's where the speculation took on a life of its own. And in the next section, we'll explore how his message reignited a global conversation about aging leaders, burnout, and the next chapter of the church itself. Because what happened after that sermon might just change how we view ministry forever. When Bishop Noel Jones's sermon clip began circulating across social media, the reactions came in waves. First came the shock. Many couldn't believe the same man who once preached with thunderous conviction and fiery authority was now standing before his congregation, speaking so softly, so vulnerably about aging. Then came the reflection. People started to recognize themselves, their parents, their mentors, even their own fears in his words. By Monday morning, the clip had been shared thousands of times on Facebook, reposted on Instagram, and dissected in Christian discussion groups across YouTube and TikTok. It wasn't just a sermon anymore. It had become a movement. people were using hashtags like Bishop Noel Jones, aging in ministry, and wisdom over weariness to express how deeply his words resonated. But what stood out most was the diversity of the responses. It wasn't just older believers who felt moved. It was young ministers, millennials, and even people outside the faith community who connected with the honesty of his message. One viral tweet read, "You don't have to be a pastor to feel what Bishop Jones said. Everyone gets tired. Everyone fears becoming irrelevant." His words hit home. Another user commented, "This man didn't just talk about aging, he talked about transition, identity, and purpose. This is bigger than ministry. It's life soon." Major Christian media outlets began picking up the story. Articles appeared with headlines like, "Bishop Noel Jones opens up about aging and ministry in heartfelt message," and "A vulnerable moment from Bishop Jones sparks global reflection on leadership and legacy." Churches across the country began discussing the topic in staff meetings, and pastors who had long avoided conversations about succession began quietly reconsidering their plans. Even within the Church of God in Christ and other Pentecostal networks, Bishop Jones's words became a case study. Leaders were asking themselves difficult questions. What happens when the shepherd grows weary? How do you honor the wisdom of an aging leader while empowering the next generation to lead? And how can churches provide support to those who have spent decades pouring out their lives for others? But this wasn't just a discussion about logistics, it was deeply emotional. For many believers, pastors like Noel Jones have been spiritual fathers and mothers. They've been constant voices in times of chaos. The thought of those voices growing faint stirred something sacred, a realization that even faith leaders are mortal, and that ministry, like life, comes in seasons. Some pastors shared their own reflections online, inspired by Bishop Jones's transparency. A well-known bishop in Texas wrote, "Noel Jones gave us a gift, the courage to talk about what we all feel but rarely admit. Aging in ministry is not defeat, it's divine transition." Others confessed that his words had forced them to confront their own exhaustion. One pastor wrote in a Facebook post that went viral, "I've been preaching every Sunday for 30 years, never missing a service, even when sick. After hearing Bishop Jones, I finally scheduled my first vacation in 10 years because he reminded me that rest is not rebellion, it's obedience." Meanwhile, members of the City of Refuge Church began expressing an outpouring of love and appreciation. They flooded Bishop Jones's inbox and comment sections with thousands of messages, thanking him for his honesty and assuring him of their prayers. One member wrote, "You've given your entire life to pouring into us. Now let us pour back into you," but not everyone reacted with peace and reflection. Some were worried. Rumors began to swirl online. Was Bishop Jones hinting at retirement? Was his health declining? Was he preparing to pass leadership of his church to someone else? These questions quickly gained momentum as blogs and gossip sites speculated about his future. Bishop Jones, however, remained composed. In later interviews, he neither confirmed nor denied any plans to step down. Instead, he spoke about the importance of legacy and the beauty of mentoring younger ministers. "It's not about quitting," he said in one interview. "It's about shifting." Every leader has to learn to move from doing to guiding. If we don't, we risk making the ministry about us instead of about God. That one line, moving from doing to guiding, became a rallying cry for leaders across denominations. It reframed the conversation entirely. Instead of seeing aging as the end, many began to see it as a sacred invitation to a new kind of purpose. And yet, what made Bishop Jones's message so profound wasn't just its theology, it was its humanity. He reminded people that ministry isn't sustained by adrenaline or charisma alone. It's sustained by grace. And grace doesn't expire with age. His message also challenged the culture of constant performance that has overtaken many churches today. Too often, pastors feel pressured to appear invincible, to keep preaching through pain, smiling through fatigue, and pretending everything is fine, even when their bodies and minds are begging for rest. Bishop Jones's confession cracked that image wide open. It made it okay to admit weakness. As one commentator put it, for decades we've watched pastors burn out, break down, and sometimes even die from the weight of ministry. What Bishop Jones did was prophetic. He gave permission for leaders to breathe. It wasn't long before other prominent voices began echoing his sentiment. Bishop T.D. Jakes spoke publicly about balance and mentorship in leadership. Pastor Charles Jenkins shared how his own transition out of full-time pastoring was one of the hardest but healthiest decisions he ever made. Even gospel artists and influencers began weighing in, posting clips of Bishop Jones's sermon alongside captions about self-care, rest, and wisdom. The ripple effect was undeniable. What started as a single emotional sermon turned into a multi-generational worldwide conversation about what it means to grow older, not just gracefully, but purposefully. And perhaps that's what Bishop Jones intended all along, to start a dialogue, to awaken an awareness, to prepare both his congregation and the wider faith community for what comes next. But before we move forward, it's important to understand who Bishop Noel Jones really is and why this moment carries such deep emotional weight. Because to truly grasp why his words hit so hard, we have to go back to where it all began.